the day she stopped existing in every memory. Elias Mercer realized something was wrong the first time someone asked him who he was talking to. They were sitting in a small cafe near the river, the kind of place where the tables were too close together and strangers' conversations overlapped like unfinished thoughts. Rain tapped gently against the windows, blurring the city into streaks of gray. Across from him, Mara was stirring her coffee, her movements calm, deliberate, familiar in a way that made his chest ache. A waitress stopped at their table. "Sir," she said, glancing at Elias with polite confusion, "are you ready to order?" Elias frowned. "We already did." The waitress smiled apologetically. "You did, but you're alone." Elias laughed, assuming it was a joke. "She wants the soup. I'll have the—" He stopped. The waitress was already walking away. Elias turned back to Mara. She was still there, still solid, still real. But something in her expression had changed. "They can't see me anymore," she said quietly. The first disappearance. Elias met Mara 6 months earlier, in a city archive buried beneath the municipal library. He had been researching abandoned districts, neighborhoods erased by rezoning, disasters that had been quietly rebuilt over, streets that no longer appeared on modern maps. Mara worked there, cataloging materials no one requested anymore. "You study places that don't exist," she'd said on their first conversation. "And you guard memories no one wants," Elias replied. They understood each other instantly. Mara had a way of listening that made Elias feel as though his words were being stored somewhere safe. She spoke carefully, choosing phrases as if language itself could fracture if handled too roughly. When she smiled, it felt earned. They fell in love slowly. And then, suddenly, which was why the cafe moment didn't feel like confusion. It felt like confirmation. "People don't forget someone overnight," Elias said later when they were walking home. "That's not how memory works." Mara stopped under a streetlight. Its glow passed through her hair in a way that felt slightly wrong. Not transparent, just less certain. "They don't forget by accident," she said. 2. The prophecy of absence. The first written sign appeared the next morning. Elias woke to find his phone open on his bedside table. A note had been typed in the blank draft of an unsent message. "She will live as long as she is forgotten." The words vanished when he touched the screen. Elias spent the day testing reality. He showed Mara's photo to his coworker. "Who is that?" the man asked. "My girlfriend." The coworker blinked. "You don't have a girlfriend." Elias checked his phone again. The photo was gone, not deleted, missing. Mara sat beside him, watching quietly. "It's happening faster now," she said. Her name stopped appearing the rules. They discovered over the next week. Photographs lost her face first. Videos skipped moments where she spoke. Text messages collapsed into empty threads. Her name stopped appearing in Elias's email search results. The world was not erasing Mara. It was editing her out. Only Elias remembered her. Only Elias could still see her. And the more the world forgot, the more solid she became, stronger, clearer, more alive. Then Elias noticed the second rule. When he forced himself not to think about her, when he avoided memories, avoided recalling the sound of her laugh, avoided replaying moments they'd shared, she looked healthier. When he remembered too much, she flickered. "You're keeping me alive," Mara said one night, "by letting me go." IV. The cost of love. Elias began destroying his memories on purpose. He deleted journal entries, burned old notebooks, refused to look at places they'd been together. He trained himself not to remember why he loved her. And it worked. Mara laughed more. Her voice grew steadier. Her hands no longer felt cold when she touched him. But Elias began losing himself. He forgot entire days, forgot his childhood home, forgot the reason he'd chosen his career. He once stared at his own reflection for 10 minutes, unable to remember his middle name. "You're fading," Mara said. "So are you," Elias replied, just in the opposite direction. That was when the final sentence appeared, not on a screen, not on paper, but reflected faintly in the window at night. "If you forget her completely, you will disappear too." V. The final truth. Mara wasn't just being erased. She was the result of erasure. She was the consciousness formed from forgotten people, the ones no one remembered, no one mourned, no one searched for. She existed because absence accumulated, and Elias had fallen in love with absence itself. The more people forget, she explained, the more of us there are. I'm not one person, I'm many. Then why me? Elias asked. Because you notice what disappears. Via is the last memory. The choice was simple, cruel, perfect, inevitable. If Elias remembered her, she would dissolve, absorbed back into the silence she came from. If he forgot her completely, she would live, and he would vanish with the final memory. They spent their last night together in his apartment. No photographs, no records, no proof, just presence, just now. When morning came, Elias stood by the window. Mara touched his face gently. Don't rush, she said. Forgetting should be kind. Elias closed his eyes. He let go of her name, then her voice, then her face. The last thing he forgot was why it hurt, the second. After Mara stepped into the sunlight alone, no one noticed her. No one questioned her presence. She was alive. Somewhere a man named Elias Mercer was never born, never lived, never remembered, and the world went on. Then on. The woman who vanished from memory. Daniel Cross noticed something was wrong on a Tuesday afternoon in November when his coworker asked him why he was smiling at an empty chair. They were in the break room at the insurance company where Daniel had worked for 3 years, and Celia was sitting across from him, eating the lunch she had packed that morning. A simple sandwich, an apple, a bottle of water. The same lunch she brought every day because she said routine was the only thing that made sense in a world determined to surprise you. What do you mean? Daniel asked. His coworker, Marcus, the one who handled claims for the Southern District, frowned at him with genuine concern. You've been talking to yourself for 5 minutes, Marcus said. You okay, man? Daniel turned back to Celia. She was still there, still solid, still real. Her dark hair was pulled back the way she always wore it, and her eyes, those warm brown eyes that had first caught his attention 8 months ago in a bookstore neither of them had any reason to visit, were watching him with an expression he didn't recognize. He can't see me, Celia said quietly. That's not, Daniel started. But Marcus was already walking away, glancing back once with the uncomfortable look people give when they suspect someone is losing their grip on reality. Daniel's hands were shaking. This is a mistake, he said. Some kind of... It's not a mistake, Celia interrupted. I was wondering when it would start. They had met in March in a used bookstore called Thornwoods that occupied the ground floor of a building that should have been condemned years ago. The shelves were crooked, the lighting was terrible, and the owner, an elderly man who never seemed to actually sell anything, watched customers with the suspicious attention of someone guarding treasure. Daniel had been looking for a book he couldn't remember the title of. He only knew it had a blue cover and that his mother had read it to him when he was young, before she died, before the memory of her voice became something he had to actively work to recall. Celia had been in the same aisle, running her fingers along spines like she was reading them by touch. You look lost, she said. I'm looking for something I can't describe. She smiled, a small, careful expression, as if smiling too widely might break something. That's the only kind of thing worth looking for. They talked for 2 hours that day, standing in the cramped aisle while the old man watched them from his counter. Celia spoke about memory the way other people spoke about weather, as something that happened to you, something you couldn't control, something that shaped your days whether you wanted it to or not. She worked at the city archive, she told him. The basement level, where they kept records no one requested anymore. Birth certificates for people with no living relatives. Photographs of buildings that had been demolished decades ago. Documents from companies that no longer existed. I spend my days with things the world has decided to forget, she said. It's peaceful in a way. No one bothers you when you're surrounded by absence. Daniel should have heard the warning in those words. He didn't. He just fell in love. Only some growth. The disappearing happened gradually at first. Small things. A photograph Daniel had taken of Celia at the botanical garden, her standing beside a fountain, laughing at something he'd said, lost her face. Not erased. Not blurred. Just absent. The fountain was there. The background was there. But where Celia should have been, there was only empty space, as if the camera had simply refused to record her. Text messages vanished mid-conversation. Daniel would scroll back through their thread and find gaps, his words still present, but her responses missing, leaving him talking to silence. Her name stopped appearing in his email search. Her contact information remained in his phone, but when he showed it to Marcus, the entry was blank, just a phone number with no name attached. "Who is this?" Marcus asked. "My girlfriend." Marcus looked at him the way people look at those they're beginning to worry about. "You don't have a girlfriend, Daniel. You've never mentioned anyone." Celia wasn't surprised by any of it. That was the part that frightened Daniel most. She accepted each disappearance with a resignation that suggested she had always known it was coming, had always understood that her time in the visible world was borrowed, temporary, subject to forces neither of them could control. It happened before, she admitted one night, when they were lying in his apartment listening to rain against the windows. "Before I met you, other people forgot me. My landlord forgot I lived in my apartment. My coworker forgot we shared an office. It's been happening my whole life, Daniel. People just stopped seeing me." "That's impossible." "And yet," Daniel sat up, staring at her in the darkness. "Then why can I still see you? Why do I still remember?" Celia was quiet for a long moment. "I don't know," she said finally. "But I think you should be careful. I think remembering me might cost you something." The prophecy appeared 3 days later. Daniel woke at 3 a.m. to find words written on his bathroom mirror, formed from condensation that shouldn't have existed because he hadn't showered, hadn't run hot water, hadn't created the conditions for steam. "She will live as long as she is forgotten." The words faded as he watched, the moisture evaporating, the message disappearing as though it had never existed. But Daniel remembered. He wrote the words down in a notebook he kept beside his bed, the notebook where he had started recording everything about Celia, her favorite foods, the way she hummed when she was thinking, the small scar on her left hand from a childhood accident she claimed not to remember. He was creating a record, a defense against forgetting. And then he noticed what the remembering was doing to her. It happened when he looked at old photographs. He had found a picture of them together at a coffee shop, one of the few images where her face remained visible. He studied it for almost an hour, memorizing every detail, the exact shade of her lipstick, the way her hair fell across her forehead, the specific angle of her smile. When he looked up, Celia was sitting across the room. She was flickering. Not metaphorically, not poetically, actually flickering, like a television with bad reception, her edges becoming uncertain, her substance becoming questionable. "What's happening?" Daniel demanded. Celia looked down at her hands. They were fading, becoming transparent, allowing the pattern of the carpet to show through her palms. "You're remembering too hard," she said. "It's pulling me back." "Back where?" "Where I came from, where forgotten things go." Daniel threw the photograph across the room. Celia solidified. Her hands became opaque, her edges became certain, and Daniel understood. The rules became clear over the following weeks. The more Daniel remembered Celia, actively remembered, consciously held on to their shared experiences, the weaker she became. Each memory he clung to pulled her toward something Daniel couldn't see, someplace beyond the visible world where forgotten things accumulated like sediment at the bottom of a lake. But the more he forgot, the more he released, let go, allowed their time together to slip away, the stronger she became. Her voice grew steadier. Her presence grew more solid. The people around them stopped looking through her and started looking at her, seeing her, acknowledging her existence in small, unconscious ways. Forgetting her was making her real. So Daniel began to forget on purpose. He deleted the photographs first, all of them. Every image he had saved, every picture he had taken, every visual record of their time together. It hurt. It hurt the way surgery hurts, necessary cutting, healing through removal, improvement through loss. Then he destroyed his notebooks, the records he had kept, the details he had documented, the memories he had been so determined to preserve. He burned them in his apartment's small fireplace, watching the pages curl and blacken, watching Celia's favorite foods and personal habits, and the sound of her laugh turn to ash. She was in the room with him when he did it. She watched the burning with an expression Daniel couldn't read. "Thank you," she whispered. "I don't want to forget you." "I know. That's why it matters." The forgetting accelerated. Daniel trained himself not to think about her. When a memory surfaced, the coffee shop where they'd had their first real conversation, the park bench where she'd told him about her childhood, the bookstore where everything had begun, he pushed it away, refused to engage, let it pass through his mind like water through open fingers. And Celia flourished. She laughed more. She spoke more freely. She touched him with hands that were warm and solid and absolutely real, leaving no doubt that she existed, that she was present, that she was finally, fully alive. But Daniel began to lose other things. He forgot his mother's voice, the last threads of memory he had clung to for decades, gone in a single night. He forgot his childhood address. He forgot his college roommate's name. He forgot why he had chosen insurance as a career, forgot the sequence of decisions that had led him to this city, forgot entire chapters of his own history. He was fading, not physically, not visibly, but essentially. The core of who he was, the accumulated experiences that made Daniel Cross a specific person rather than an empty shell, was dissolving. He was forgetting himself into nothing. "You have to stop," Celia said. They were in his apartment. It was winter now. Snow was falling outside the window, and the world was muffled by white. "I can't stop," Daniel replied. "If I remember you, you disappear. And if you keep forgetting, you will too." Daniel looked at her, at this woman he loved, this woman he was killing himself to save, this woman who existed in the space between memory and absence. "How do you know?" Celia reached into her pocket and withdrew a small piece of paper, folded many times, worn soft by handling. "Because of this." She unfolded the paper and held it toward him. Written in handwriting Daniel didn't recognize were words that made his blood go cold. "If you forget her completely, you will disappear too." "Where did you get this?" "It appeared in my hand," Celia said. "The same way the words appeared on your mirror. The same way all of this has been appearing. We're being told a story, Daniel. We're being given rules. And the rules say that this ends one of two ways." "Which two?" Celia's eyes were wet. "Either you remember me and I vanish forever, or you forget me completely and I live, but you're erased along with the last memory of who I am." "Those aren't choices. Those are punishments." "They're the same thing," Celia said. "They've always been the same thing." Daniel stopped fighting. He understood now. Understood what Celia was, where she had come from, why she had always known this was coming. She wasn't a single person. She was an accumulation. Every forgotten soul, every erased memory, every person who had slipped from the world's attention and vanished without anyone noticing. They had to go somewhere. They had to become something. Celia was that something. She was the consciousness formed from absence, the presence created by forgetting, the woman shaped from all the people no one remembered anymore. And Daniel, with his archive research, with his obsession with disappeared places and erased histories, had been the perfect person to find her, the perfect person to love her, the perfect person to feed her with forgetting. "How many others?" he asked. "Others. How many other people have loved you? How many have forgotten themselves to keep you alive?" Celia was silent for a long time. "I don't remember," she finally said. And Daniel understood that she wasn't lying, that the people who had loved her and lost themselves for her had become part of her, absorbed into the accumulated absence she embodied. They had forgotten her completely, and they had disappeared. Daniel made his choice on a night in February when the snow had stopped falling and the world outside was silent. He didn't fight it, didn't resist it, didn't try to find a loophole or a third option or a way to save both of them. Some equations only balance one way. Some loves only survive through sacrifice. They spent the evening together without speaking, without photographs, without records, without any evidence that the night was happening at all. Celia made dinner, something simple, something warm, something Daniel knew he wouldn't remember. They sat together on the couch, watching the darkness beyond the windows. "I'm scared," Daniel admitted. "I know." Not of disappearing, of forgetting that this mattered. Celia took his hand. Her fingers were warm, real, alive. It will always have mattered, she said, even if no one remembers. Meaning doesn't require memory. Love doesn't require proof. Daniel closed his eyes. He let go of her name. It was easier than he expected, like releasing a breath he'd been holding too long, like setting down a weight he'd been carrying until his arms shook. Her name slipped away, then her voice, then the specific color of her eyes, the exact texture of her hair, the precise way she smiled when she thought no one was watching. He forgot the bookstore where they met. He forgot the cafe where someone first failed to see her. He forgot the shape of her handwriting, the sound of her laugh, the feeling of her hand in his. One by one, the memories dissolved, and with each one, Daniel felt himself becoming lighter, thinner, less certain. He was disappearing. Not in a flash, not dramatically, just gently, like fog lifting, like dreams fading, like all the things we forget we ever knew. The last memory was the hardest. It was a moment from their first month together. They had been walking along the river at sunset, and she had stopped to watch the light on the water, and Daniel had looked at her, looking at the light, and he had known, absolutely, completely, undeniably, that he loved her. That moment, that perfect, unrepeatable, unsavable moment, he held it as long as he could, then he let it go. The woman who had been called many names stepped into the morning light alone. The city moved around her. Cars passed, people walked. The world continued its endless rotation, utterly unaware that anything had changed. She stood on the sidewalk outside an apartment building she didn't recognize, carrying no memories of the night before, the month before, the person who had loved her enough to let her live. She felt real, solid, seen. For the first time in what felt like forever, people looked at her and registered her presence. They stepped aside when she walked. They nodded when she passed. They saw her. Somewhere, a man named Daniel Cross had never existed, had never been born, had never lived or loved or searched for things that disappeared. The world had no memory of him. No photographs, no records, no evidence, just absence, just the shape of something that was gone before anyone knew it was there. The woman walked to a coffee shop and ordered breakfast and sat by the window watching strangers pass. She felt something missing. She didn't know what. She didn't know why. She just knew that something had been there, something warm, something real, something that had mattered, and now it was gone. She finished her coffee. She left the shop. She walked into the day, into the life that had been purchased for her with a cost she would never understand. And somewhere, in the space where forgotten things accumulate, a man who had loved her completely continued to exist. Not as a memory, not as a person, just as love, just as the act itself, just as the choice to save someone by becoming nothing. Years passed. The woman lived her life. She made friends. She built routines. She existed in the world the way people exist, moving through days, collecting experiences, becoming someone. But sometimes, late at night, she would feel something, a presence, a warmth, the sense of being loved by someone she couldn't name, couldn't remember, couldn't prove had ever existed. She never told anyone about these moments. What would she say? That she felt haunted by an absence, that she suspected someone had disappeared so she could remain, that love could survive even when both the lover and the memory of love were gone. She kept the feeling to herself, held it close, let it comfort her in the dark. And somewhere beyond memory, beyond existence, beyond the world's capacity to record or remember, the love she felt continued. Not because anyone remembered it, because it had been real, because it had been given. Because some things exist not through memory, but through consequence, the shape they leave in the world, the people they save, the lives they make possible. Daniel Cross was gone, but what he had done remained. In her survival, in her solidity, in her continued presence in a world that could finally see her. He had loved her completely, and then he had forgotten her completely. And that was enough. That was everything. That was the only kind of love that could survive the end of memory itself. The woman lived for many years. She was happy, mostly. She was real, always. And sometimes, when the light hit the water a certain way, or when she walked past a bookstore she'd never entered, or when she felt suddenly, inexplicably, as though someone was watching her with perfect love, she would stop. She would breathe. She would let the feeling pass through her like a memory she couldn't quite catch, and then she would keep walking. Into the day, into the life, into the existence that someone had paid everything to give her. She never knew his name. She never saw his face. She just felt sometimes in the quiet moments that she had been loved, that she had been chosen, that someone, somewhere, had decided she was worth more than themselves. And that was enough. That was always enough. The Woman Who Vanished from Memory, Extended Edition Part 1. The First Fracture. Daniel Cross had spent his entire adult life studying the things that disappeared. The neighborhoods erased by urban development, the communities swallowed by rising waters, the people who walked out of their lives one morning and were never seen again. Which was perhaps why he recognized so quickly what was happening to Celia. Why he understood, before anyone else could have understood, that the woman sitting across from him in the small cafe near the river wasn't simply being ignored or overlooked, but was actively, systematically, impossibly being removed from the fabric of reality itself, edited out of existence, like a mistake in a manuscript that someone had decided needed correcting. The rain had been falling for 3 days straight, the kind of relentless autumn rain that turned the city into a watercolor painting, where all the edges bled together. And Daniel had suggested the cafe because it was warm and close, and because Celia had mentioned once that she liked the way rain sounded against windows, liked the feeling of being inside while the world outside dissolved into gray uncertainty. They had been together for 8 months by then, 8 months of slow dinners and long conversations, and the gradual, terrifying process of allowing another person to see the parts of yourself you usually kept hidden. And Daniel had reached the point where he couldn't imagine his life without her in it. Couldn't remember what his apartment had felt like before her books started appearing on his shelves. Couldn't recall what silence had sounded like before he learned to recognize her particular way of breathing while she slept. The waitress approached their table with the mechanical cheerfulness of someone working a double shift, her smile fixed in place, her eyes already moving to the next task before she finished the current one. "Just you today, sir?" she asked, and Daniel heard the words but didn't process them, didn't understand what she was saying because the question made no sense, because Celia was sitting right there. Because how could anyone look at their table and see only one person when there were clearly, obviously, undeniably two? "We ordered already," Daniel said, confusion making his voice sharper than he intended. "She wanted the soup. I asked for the sandwich." The waitress's smile flickered, not with recognition, but with the particular discomfort people display when they encounter someone who might not be entirely stable, someone whose grip on reality might be looser than it should be. "Sir, you ordered a sandwich. Just a sandwich. For yourself." She walked away before Daniel could respond, and he turned back to Celia, expecting to find her laughing, expecting this to be some elaborate joke he didn't understand, some prank she had coordinated with the staff for reasons that would become clear in a moment when everyone started laughing and the tension dissolved into absurdity. But Celia wasn't laughing. Celia was looking at him with an expression he had never seen before, a mixture of sadness and resignation, and something that looked almost like relief, as though she had been waiting for this moment, dreading it and anticipating it in equal measure, knowing it would come eventually because it always came, because this was how her existence worked, because she had lived through this before and would live through it again and again until there was no one left who could see her at all. "It's starting," she said, and her voice was steady in a way that made Daniel's chest tighten with fear, because people whose worlds were collapsing weren't supposed to sound calm, weren't supposed to accept catastrophe with such quiet certainty, weren't supposed to look at the unraveling of everything and simply nod as though this was expected, inevitable, almost welcome. "What's starting? Celia, what the hell is happening?" She reached across the table and took his hand, and her fingers were cold, colder than they should have been, colder than made sense given the warmth of the cafe, and Daniel felt something shift in his perception, felt the first crack appear in his understanding of what was real and what was possible. "They can't see me anymore," Celia said. "I was wondering when it would begin." Part 2. The Archive of Forgotten Things. Daniel had found her in March in the basement of the municipal library where the city kept its collection of abandoned records. Documents no one had requested in decades, photographs of places that no longer existed, the paper ghosts of a past that the present had decided to stop remembering. And he had been down there because his research required it, because he was writing a book about disappeared neighborhoods, because he had built his entire academic career on the study of absence and erasure, and the way communities could simply vanish from the collective memory of a city that had once been their home. The basement was poorly lit and poorly ventilated, the air thick with dust and the particular smell of old paper slowly decomposing. And Daniel had been alone for hours when he realized that he wasn't alone anymore, that someone was moving through the stacks behind him, someone whose footsteps were so quiet they were almost inaudible, someone who seemed to belong in this place of forgotten things in a way that Daniel, despite his academic interest, never could. He found her in the section devoted to the 1947 flood, the disaster that had swallowed 3 neighborhoods and displaced 10,000 people. The catastrophe that the city had rebuilt over so completely that most current residents didn't even know it had happened. And she was holding a photograph of a street that no longer existed, studying it with an intensity that suggested she was looking for something specific, something personal, something that mattered to her in ways that went beyond historical curiosity. "That's Morrison Street," Daniel said, recognizing the image from his research. It was under 8 feet of water for almost 2 weeks. They never rebuilt it, just paved over the ruins and pretended the neighborhood had never been there. The woman looked up at him, and Daniel felt something shift in his chest. Not attraction, not yet, but recognition, the strange and immediate sense that he had met someone who understood something fundamental about existence that most people never even considered. "You study places that don't exist anymore," she said, and it wasn't a question. "And you work here," Daniel replied, "surrounded by things no one wants to remember." She smiled, a small, careful expression that seemed to cost her something, and extended her hand. "I'm Celia. I've been here for 3 years. You're the first person who's ever come down to the basement without asking me why anyone would want to spend their time with all this forgotten garbage." "Because forgetting is easy," Daniel said, taking her hand, noticing that her fingers were cool, noticing that her grip was gentler than he expected. "Anyone can forget, but someone has to remember, or the things that disappeared might as well have never existed at all." Celia held his hand a moment longer than necessary. "Yes," she said softly, "someone has to remember." They fell in love the way people fall in love when they recognize something essential in each other, not quickly, not dramatically, but with the slow inevitability of water finding its level, of gravity pulling objects toward each other, of 2 people who had been waiting their whole lives for someone who understood finally finding that understanding in the most unlikely place. Daniel learned her habits, the way she hummed when she was thinking, the way she always ordered tea but never drank more than half of it, the way she paused before answering questions as though she was choosing her words from a vast internal library of possible responses and wanted to make sure she selected exactly the right ones. He learned her history, or what she shared of it, which was less than he expected, less than seemed normal, as though large portions of her past had been redacted, removed, rendered inaccessible even to her own memory. She couldn't remember where she had grown up. She knew it was somewhere in the Midwest, somewhere with flat horizons and endless fields of grain, but the specific town, the specific house, the specific people who had raised her, these details were missing. Gaps in her biography that she acknowledged with a shrug and a quiet comment that some things weren't meant to be remembered. She couldn't remember her parents' faces. She knew she had had parents. Everyone had parents. But when she tried to picture them, tried to recall the sound of their voices or the feeling of their presence, she found only emptiness, a space where memories should have been, but weren't. She couldn't remember how she had come to this city, couldn't recall the decision that had led her to take a job, cataloging forgotten documents in a basement that most people didn't know existed, couldn't explain why she felt so at home among the records of disappeared places and erased histories. "It's like I've always been here," she told Daniel one night when they were lying in his bed, listening to the sounds of the city through the open window. "Not just in this city, here, in this moment, with you. Like everything else was just waiting, preparation for something I can't name." Daniel should have recognized the warning in those words, should have understood that someone who couldn't remember their own past might have a very different relationship with memory than he assumed. But he was in love, and love makes you stupid. Love makes you believe that the warnings don't apply to you. Part 3. The evidence of absence. The disappearing began so gradually that Daniel almost didn't notice it, almost wrote off the early signs as coincidence or misunderstanding or the natural result of Celia's quiet personality, her tendency to fade into the background at social gatherings, her preference for observing rather than participating. First, the photographs. Daniel had taken dozens of pictures of Celia over their months together. Candid shots of her reading in the park, formal portraits when they dressed up for dinners, silly selfies that captured moments of joy he wanted to preserve forever. And he had stored them all on his phone, had backed them up to his computer, had even printed a few to frame and hang in his apartment. The printed photographs changed first. Daniel noticed one morning that the picture on his bedside table, Celia laughing at something he'd said, her head thrown back, her eyes crinkled with genuine amusement, looked different than he remembered, looked somehow incomplete, looked as though the image was developing in reverse, the subject slowly fading while the background remained crisp and clear. Within a week, the photograph showed only an empty park bench. No Celia, no indication that anyone had ever been sitting there, just absence where presence should have been. The digital photographs followed the same pattern, faces blurring, figures dissolving, entire images corrupting themselves into collections of pixels that showed everything except the woman Daniel had been trying to capture. He showed the corrupted files to a tech-savvy friend who examined them with growing confusion and eventually admitted that he had no explanation, that files didn't degrade this way, that the specific pattern of corruption, everything remaining intact except one particular element, defied every principle of digital storage he understood. "It's like the camera just refused to record her," the friend said. Like reality itself decided she wasn't supposed to be in these pictures. Daniel didn't sleep that night. The text messages disappeared next. Daniel had saved every conversation he and Celia had ever had, hundreds of exchanges that chronicled the evolution of their relationship, the awkward early flirtation, the gradual deepening of intimacy, the jokes they shared and the secrets they revealed, and the simple, mundane communications that somehow became precious simply because she had written them. He opened the thread one morning expecting to review a conversation from the previous day, to reread something funny she had said that he wanted to remember accurately. Gaps. The thread was full of gaps. His messages were there, all of them, intact, preserved exactly as he had written them, but her responses were gone, vanished, erased so completely that the conversation read like a monologue, like Daniel talking to himself, asking questions that no one answered, making jokes that no one laughed at, building a relationship with empty space. He searched his entire phone. Her name appeared nowhere. Her contact information existed, a phone number with no name attached, no photo, no evidence that the number had ever belonged to anyone at all. He called the number. It rang. Celia answered. "I'm disappearing from your phone," she said, before he could speak. "I know. I saw it happening on my end first. Your messages are still here, but the context is gone. It looks like you've been texting a stranger." "This is impossible. And yet." "Celia, we need to talk about this. We need to figure out what's happening." "I know what's happening," she said, and her voice carried that same terrible resignation he had heard in the cafe. "I've always known. I just hoped it would take longer this time. I hoped that loving someone as much as I love you would be enough to anchor me, to make me real enough to stay. This time." "Celia, what do you mean this time?" Silence on the line. Then, "Come over. There's something I need to show you." Part 4. The prophecy Written in absence. She showed him the box that night, a small wooden container she kept hidden in the back of her closet, underneath clothes she never wore, behind shoes she had forgotten she owned. Inside the box were letters, dozens of them, written on paper that was yellowed with age, in handwriting that varied from letter to letter as though each had been penned by a different person, but all addressed to the same recipient, to the one who comes after. I found these in the archive, Celia said quietly. Years ago, before I met you, before I understood what I was. They were in a collection of documents that had been abandoned by an estate with no heirs, papers that no one wanted, records that no one claimed, the accumulated detritus of a life that ended without anyone to remember it. Daniel opened the first letter with hands that trembled. To the one who comes after. If you are reading this, then you are like me, a woman who exists in the spaces between memory, who lives only as long as she is forgotten, who must choose between being loved and being real. I don't know how many of us there have been. I don't know how long this has continued, but I know the rules because I learned them the same way you will learn them. Through loss, through disappearance, through the slow erosion of everything I thought I understood about existence. The first rule: the more people remember you, the less real you become. The second rule: the more people forget you, the more solid you grow. The third rule: if someone loves you, truly loves you, with the kind of desperate, consuming love that imprints itself on the soul, then you have a choice to make. They can remember you and you will disappear, or they can forget you and you will survive. But there is a cost. There is always a cost. If they forget you completely, every memory, every moment, every trace of your existence in their mind, then they will disappear too. Their forgetting will erase them. Their sacrifice will unmake them, and you will live, but you will live alone, knowing that someone loved you enough to destroy themselves for you. I don't know why we exist. I don't know what made us this way. I only know that love is the most dangerous thing we can experience, and being remembered is the closest we will ever come to death. Protect yourself. Stay invisible. Never let anyone love you so much that forgetting you would cost them everything. The one who came before. Daniel read the letter 3 times, and each reading made the words more impossible, more terrible, more clearly connected to what he had been witnessing over the past weeks. You knew, he said finally. You knew this whole time. Celia nodded, and her eyes were wet with tears she was too proud to shed. I've known since I found the letters. I've known what I was, what the rules were, why I couldn't let anyone get too close. But then I met you, Daniel, and you saw me. You really saw me. Not just my appearance, but everything underneath, everything I've been trying to hide since I understood what hiding meant. So what happens now? Now we choose, Celia said. You can keep remembering me, holding on to every moment we've shared, preserving our love in your memory like a butterfly pinned under glass. And I'll fade, I'll disappear, I'll dissolve back into the absence I came from, and you'll spend the rest of your life remembering a woman who no longer exists. Or you can forget me. Let go of every memory, every moment, every piece of our time together. And I'll survive. I'll become real. I'll walk through the world the way other people walk through it, seen, acknowledged, present. But if I forget you completely, you'll disappear too, Celia finished. Your forgetting will create a void where you used to be. You'll be erased the same way I was supposed to be erased, and no one will remember that you ever existed. Daniel felt the weight of the choice pressing down on him, felt the impossibility of what was being asked, felt the cruel precision of a trap that had been designed to ensure that love, real love, the kind worth having, could never survive. That's not a choice, he said. That's a punishment. It's both, Celia replied. It's always both. Part 5. The deliberate dissolution. Daniel began forgetting on purpose the next morning, not because he had decided, not because he had accepted the choice that was being forced on him, but because he had seen Celia flicker, actually flicker, like a projection with a faulty bulb, when he spent too long looking at old photographs, and he couldn't bear to watch her disappear, couldn't stand the thought of his memories being the weapon that destroyed her. He started with the small things. The name of the restaurant where they'd had their first real date, the Italian place near the waterfront where the pasta was mediocre, but the view was spectacular. He let that go, let it slip from his mind, actively refused to engage with the memory when it surfaced. The exact color of the dress she'd worn to his friend's wedding. Blue, it had been some shade of blue, but he couldn't remember precisely which shade. He stopped trying to recall, stopped chasing the specificity that would have anchored the memory more firmly. The sound of her laugh, he had loved that sound, had recorded it without her knowledge, just so he could listen to it when she wasn't there. He deleted the recording, deleted it without listening to it one last time, because one last time would have been a remembering, and remembering was what he was trying to stop. Each deliberate forgetting made Celia stronger. He watched it happen, watched her grow more solid, more present, more visible to the world that had been slowly editing her out of existence. The waitress at the cafe saw her now, saw her and smiled, and took her order and brought her food without any confusion about who she was or why she was there. Friends who had looked through her started looking at her, started engaging with her, talking to her, treating her like a real person rather than a figment of Daniel's imagination. She was becoming real, and Daniel was beginning to disappear. He noticed the erosion of himself in small ways at first, forgetting where he'd left his keys, forgetting appointments he'd made, forgetting the names of colleagues he'd worked with for years. Then the losses grew larger. He forgot his mother's maiden name. He forgot the city where he'd been born. He forgot the subject of the doctoral dissertation he'd spent 4 years writing, forgot the argument he'd made, forgot why any of it had seemed important at the time. His reflection in the mirror started to look uncertain, not transparent, not obviously fading, but somehow less defined, as though the universe was having trouble deciding exactly where his edges were supposed to be. "You need to stop," Celia said one night, watching him struggle to remember the name of his oldest friend. "You're going too far." "I'm not going far enough," Daniel replied. "You're still flickering sometimes. When I think about you too hard, when I remember something too clearly, you start to fade. I can see it happening. And I can see what's happening to you. You're losing yourself, Daniel. You're dissolving. Every memory you destroy takes a piece of you with it. Then it takes a piece of me. Better that than watching you disappear. Not better. Not better for me. Not better for anyone. I don't want to survive if it means you're destroyed. I don't want to be real if the cost of my reality is your existence." Daniel took her hands in his, her warm hands, her solid hands, hands that felt more present than they had in months, and met her eyes with a certainty he didn't feel. "That's not your choice to make," he said. "It's mine, and I've made it." Part 6. The Final Offering. He spent their last night together trying not to remember it. A contradiction. An impossibility. The kind of paradox that breaks minds and ruins lives and proves that some situations have no good outcomes, only varying degrees of loss. They didn't take photographs, didn't write anything down, didn't create any evidence that the night was happening, because evidence could become memory, and memory had become the enemy. They just existed together. Present tense only, no past to cling to, no future to anticipate. Just two people who loved each other, sitting in a small apartment, while the city hummed outside and the hours counted down toward an ending that one of them would never remember. "Tell me something I should know about you," Daniel said around midnight. "Something I would have wanted to learn if we'd had more time." Celia was quiet for a long moment. "I don't know if I've ever been real," she said finally. "Not just because of this, the disappearing, the forgetting, the way existence treats me as optional. But before all of it, before I met you, before I found the letters, I've never felt like I was supposed to be here, like I was a person rather than a placeholder, like I mattered in any way that would persist. You matter to me. I know. That's what makes this so hard. You're the first person who's ever looked at me like I was someone worth seeing, the first person who made me feel like maybe I could be real, even if reality kept trying to reject me. You are real. You're the realest person I've ever known." Celia smiled, that careful, earned smile he had fallen in love with in a basement full of forgotten things. "That's why you have to forget me," she said, "because you made me real, and now you have to keep me that way." Daniel closed his eyes. He let go of her smile, then her voice, then the way she looked at him like he was the answer to a question she'd been asking her whole life. He let go of the first time they'd made love and the last time they'd fought and all the ordinary moments in between that had somehow become the most precious things he'd ever experienced. He let go of her favorite book and her worst fear, and the small scar on her left hand from an accident she claimed not to remember. He let go of knowing why he loved her. He let go of knowing that he loved her. He let go of knowing that there was a her to love. The last thing he forgot was his own name. Epilogue. The woman who remained. She walked into the morning light alone, not understanding why she was crying, not remembering what she had lost, not knowing that somewhere in the space where forgotten things accumulated, a man who had loved her more than his own existence continued to love her still. The city moved around her in its endless, indifferent way, cars and crowds and the vast machinery of civilization doing what it had always done, oblivious to the small tragedies being enacted in its margins. She felt real, solid, present in a way she couldn't remember feeling before. People looked at her now, saw her, registered her existence with the casual acknowledgement they gave to everyone who crossed their path. She was no longer invisible. She was no longer forgotten. She was alive in the fullest sense of the word, anchored in reality, fixed in the perception of others, permanent in a way she had never dared to hope she could be. But something was missing. She didn't know what it was, couldn't name the absence, couldn't explain the hollow ache that had settled into her chest and refused to leave. She just knew that something had been there, something warm, something important, something that had made existence worthwhile, and now it was gone. She sat in a cafe near the river, ordering tea she wouldn't finish, watching the rain trace patterns on the window, feeling the ghost of a memory that had been erased so completely that only its shadow remained. Someone loved me, she thought, and she didn't know where the thought came from, didn't understand why she was so certain of something she couldn't remember. Someone loved me, and they're gone now. Someone chose me over themselves. Someone decided I was worth disappearing for. She let the thought settle into her like sediment drifting to the bottom of still water, let it become part of her foundation, let it anchor her in ways she couldn't explain. She didn't remember his name. She didn't remember his face. She didn't remember anything about him at all. Not how they met, not how they loved, not how he chose to save her by destroying himself. But she remembered being loved. That was what survived. Not the lover, not the memories, not the evidence of what they had shared. Just the love itself, just the warmth of it, just the impossible, inexplicable, undeniable truth of it. She finished her tea, she paid her bill, she walked out into the rain, letting it wash over her, letting it prove that she was real enough for water to touch, solid enough for the world to affect. And somewhere deep inside her, in the place where forgotten things left their marks, she felt a presence, not a memory, not a ghost, just love, just the shape of it, just the weight of it, just the permanent, indelible, indestructible truth of what someone had felt for her strongly enough to erase themselves from existence. That was what remained. That was what would always remain, not the person, the love, just the love. The deepest love leaves no evidence, only transformation, only the permanent change it works upon those it touches, only the shape of absence where presence used to be, only the warmth that persists long after the source of warmth has vanished. Some sacrifices are never known, some gifts are never acknowledged, some love survives only as a feeling without a name, a presence without a face, a truth without proof. And perhaps that is enough. Perhaps that is everything. Perhaps the love that asks nothing, not even to be remembered, is the only love that truly lasts. The woman who vanished from memory, the final chapter. Extra. What the Forgotten Remember. 7 years after Daniel Cross ceased to exist, a woman named Celia found a notebook in a used bookstore she had no memory of ever visiting before. The bookstore was called Thornwoods, and it occupied the ground floor of a building that should have been condemned decades ago. Its shelves crooked and dusty, its lighting dim and unreliable, its elderly owner watching customers with the suspicious attention of someone guarding secrets rather than selling merchandise. Celia didn't know why she had walked inside, didn't understand the pull that had drawn her through the door, didn't recognize the strange familiarity that washed over her as she moved through the narrow aisles, didn't comprehend why her heart was beating faster with every step, as though her body remembered something her mind had been forced to forget. The notebook was wedged between two volumes of poetry on a shelf near the back, its leather cover worn soft by handling, its pages yellowed by time, its existence in this particular location seeming less like coincidence and more like intention, as though someone had placed it here specifically for her to find, had known she would come, had waited 7 years for this exact moment. She opened it with trembling hands. The first page contained a single sentence, written in handwriting she didn't recognize, but which somehow felt familiar, felt like home, felt like the answer to a question she hadn't known she was asking, for the woman I loved enough to forget. Celia's vision blurred with tears she couldn't explain. She turned the page. She turned the page. If you're reading this, then I succeeded. You're alive. You're real. You're walking through the world the way other people walk through it, seen, acknowledged, present. And I'm gone. Not dead exactly. Something stranger. Something that doesn't have a name because no one who experiences it survives to name it. I'm writing this notebook in the weeks before I complete the forgetting, in the final days when I still remember enough to hold a pen, still know enough to form sentences, still exist enough to leave something behind. I don't know if you'll ever find it. I don't know if finding it will help or hurt. I don't know anything anymore, really, except that I love you, and that loving you is costing me everything, and that I would pay this price 1,000 times over if it meant you got to stay. Your name is Celia. You work in an archive, surrounded by forgotten things. You have a small scar on your left hand from an accident you don't remember. You hum when you're thinking, always the same melody, something without words that sounds like it belongs to a song that was never finished. You prefer tea to coffee, but you never drink more than half of what you order. You smile like it costs you something, like joy is a currency you can't afford to spend freely. And when you look at someone, really look, with your full attention, they feel seen in a way they've never felt before. I know these things because I watched you, because I memorized you, because I built a cathedral of memory dedicated entirely to who you are and how you move through the world and why your existence matters more than anything I've ever encountered. And now I'm tearing that cathedral down, stone by stone, memory by memory, because remembering you is killing you, and forgetting you is killing me. But between those two deaths, I choose mine. I will always choose mine. Celia was sobbing now, tears streaming down her face in the dusty silence of the bookstore, her whole body shaking with the force of an emotion she didn't understand, couldn't explain, had no context for, because the context had been erased along with the man who had created it. She turned more pages, found drawings, sketches of her face from angles she had never seen, captured by someone who had studied her with the devotion of an artist and the desperation of someone trying to preserve what they knew they were about to lose. Found lists, her favorite foods, her preferred routes through the city, the books she had mentioned wanting to read, the places she had said she wanted to visit someday. Found love letters that were never sent, confessions that were never spoken, the accumulated evidence of a devotion so complete that destroying it must have felt like self-annihilation, and found, on the final page, a single paragraph that broke something inside her that she hadn't known could break. I don't know what happens after this. I don't know if forgetting you completely will erase me instantly or gradually. Don't know if I'll have time to understand what's happening, or if I'll simply stop existing between one heartbeat and the next. But I know this. Whatever comes after, whatever happens to the consciousness that used to be Daniel Cross, I will carry you with me. Not as memory. Memory is what I'm sacrificing. As love. Just love. The feeling without the facts, the warmth without the source, the absolute, unshakable certainty that somewhere in the universe there is a woman worth dying for, worth more than dying for, worth ceasing to exist for. That's you, Celia. That's always been you. And even when I can't remember your name, even when I can't picture your face, even when every trace of our time together has been erased from my mind, I will still love you. I will love you in the darkness. I will love you in the absence. I will love you in whatever void waits for people who give up everything for someone else. Because some things don't need memory to survive. Some things are bigger than memory. Some things exist in the space between heartbeats, in the pause between breaths, in the silence between words. That's where I'll be, loving you forever, even if forever means nothing, even if love means nothing, even if I mean nothing. It will still be true. Goodbye, Celia. I hope being real is everything you wanted. I hope the world treats you kindly. I hope someone else loves you someday. Someone who gets to keep their memories, someone who doesn't have to choose between having you and saving you. You deserve that. You deserve everything, and I'm sorry I couldn't give it to you. But I could give you this: existence, reality, the chance to live without fading. Take it, live, be happy. And if you ever feel in the quiet moments like someone is watching over you, like someone is loving you from very far away, like someone is still there, even though you can't see them or remember them or prove they ever existed, trust that feeling, because it's true, because I'm there, because I will always be there. Forgotten but not gone, erased but not absent, loving you from the other side of memory. Forever. Daniel. Celia closed the notebook and pressed it against her chest, holding it like a lifeline, like a sacred object, like the only proof that the hollow ache she had carried for 7 years wasn't imaginary, wasn't pathological, wasn't the sign of a broken mind, but the evidence of a broken heart that didn't know what had broken it. Daniel, she whispered, and the name felt strange on her tongue, unfamiliar but not unknown, like a word in a language she had once spoken fluently but had forgotten, like a melody she had once sung every day but hadn't heard in years. She said it again, Daniel. And somewhere, in the space between memory and forgetting, in the void where erased people accumulated, in the darkness that existed outside of existence itself, something stirred. Something that had been waiting. Something that had been loving. Something that had never stopped. Celia kept the notebook. She read it every day for months, memorizing the words, learning the shape of a love she couldn't remember experiencing, building a relationship with a ghost who had chosen to become a ghost so she could become real. She didn't know if reading about him counted as remembering him, didn't know if the rules that had governed their relationship still applied, didn't know if loving someone through their words rather than through lived experience was enough to trigger the curse that had destroyed him. But she read anyway, because she needed to know, because he deserved to be known, because some stories refuse to stay forgotten, refuse to fade, refuse to accept that absence is permanent. And sometimes, late at night, when the city was quiet and the world felt thin around the edges, she would feel something, a warmth beside her, a presence in the empty room, a love so vast and patient that it had survived its own annihilation. She never saw him, never heard him, never found any evidence that he still existed in any form. But she felt him, and that was enough. That would always be enough. Some love transcends memory. Some sacrifices are never repaid. Some people become so essential that even after they cease to exist, the shape of their absence remains, permanent, precious. Present in every empty chair and every unanswered question and every moment of joy that feels incomplete for reasons no one can explain. He forgot her so she could live. She remembered him so he could matter. And somewhere between forgetting and remembering, between absence and presence, between the man who disappeared and the woman who remained, love continued. Love persisted. Love refused to end. Because that's what love does. It survives. It endures. It exists in the spaces that logic says should be empty. And it never, ever truly forgets. The only love worth having is the love that outlasts everything, even the lovers themselves. The end.